Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? My name is Ralph Schultz. I'm coming from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I just moved here last September from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I lived there 13 years. Before I start my presentation, I want to mention a couple points to keep in mind. You need to understand the Russian point of view. That's why I wrote this, and the Chinese, where they're coming from, to get a full picture of the situation with Russia and the United States, Ukraine, and their policies. That's the only way you can make a good decision as to what you truly believe in. And we're not getting that in the West. I've been called a vatnik because what I happen to espouse pretty much matches the Russian line, and that's only because I spent 10 years studying this and in and out, backwards and forwards, and I've come to the same conclusion, and that is, for the most part, the United States has substantially encouraged Ukraine to become a state hostile to Russia, and therefore Russian policies correspondingly became defensive, and the U.S. did provoke Russia into intervening in the Ukraine. Things just got out of hand from what was originally anticipated. So you do not put, as I said in my book, you do not push Russia into a corner and then taunt it and tease it. It'll come out like the Russian bear it is and attack you aggressively, and that's what's happened today with this war and everything else that's going on. You have to see it through Russian eyes, not Western eyes, not NATO eyes, not US eyes. Okay, so I was a graduate of Northwestern University with an honors degree in history in 1969, and in 1972 I received an MBA from the University of Chicago in finance. It's an esteemed school, top rank in the world right now. Excuse me, I had to check out something there. Pardon me. In the summer of 1968, I went to Russia on a study trip with the Northwestern University Russian department with several, about 20 students and 3 Russian Slavic studies professors and linguists, and had a marvelous time there, learning the language and coming to understand the Soviet Union a little better. And it certainly made an impression on me. Thereafter, I became graduated and went on to a career in corporate banking. I also need to add that I also was an All-American runner, 800 meters between 1967 and 70. I set Big Ten records and championships, and I actually tied a world record. And it's in the book because I want the Russians to see that an American outstanding athlete can actually understand them and try to understand them, and be willing to write something in public about it. So after I went into higher education in 2005, I worked on a couple Indian reservations, Pine Ridge in South Dakota and the Navajo Res in Arizona, at their tribal schools teaching business courses. And then I moved to Albuquerque in 2009, and for about 10 years I taught economics courses at Central New Mexico Community College. I really love that, and I influenced a lot of students. Here I taught about 1,200 students who finally became understanding of what the parameters are regarding poverty and what socialism really is in terms of economics, not emotions. So I wanted to also mention that I grew up with a Ukrainian family because my stepfather raised me. He was Ukrainian, and my mother, natural mother, was Polish. So I grew up in the south side of Chicago in almost entirely 100% Polish neighborhood. It was really a great time for me. I really enjoyed it. And the Ukrainian family, they always kind of looked themselves interchangeably as either Ukrainian or Russian. There was no major distinguishing comments made, and that's how I kind of looked at it. It's kind of one and the same, kind of like the North and the South in the United States. Are great, fun-loving people. My step-grandfather was born in the Ukraine, as was my step-grandmother, and they came here in the 1920s. He worked as a steel worker. He went back there in the 60s, and Ukraine and his relatives were agricultural workers living in sort of wooden shacks, if you will, with dirt floors. My step-grandmother had Russian Easter eggs and those dolls that interlock, and wore print dresses, and her appearance was she looked like she was from the steppes of Russia. And stereotypical babushka. When I was there in '68, some things made a real big impression on me. Very briefly, I remember being inside the Kremlin in a theater. It's not just offices there. There's theaters, museums, and for a Russian presentation of a ballet. And in the audience of this huge auditorium, there were about 1/3 were Chinese communist officers in their beige high-neck uniforms with red epaulets. And I was just amazed that there I was in the middle of an auditorium with Russians and Chinese who were supposed to be our enemies. But to me, they weren't my enemy. I refused to believe in that. And then there was another time when I was playing basketball with a young Russian man who was a college student. He said he was studying to be a diplomat. And lo and behold, he said he wanted to go to Hanoi right at the time after Tet Offensive and our terrible war in Vietnam. Another time we walked down the street past the storefront, small place, with a big map of Vietnam on the window, with all the battles marked. We went inside, and it turned out to be the Viet Cong or National Liberation Front embassy, not the Hanoi government embassy. And we were taken to a room and sat down at a table, a nice conference room, and had tea and chocolates. And the emissary there said to us in this little kind way, "We're sorry, some of you may have to go to Vietnam and be killed if you're soldiers." That shook me up. Another time I met an economics student at Moscow State University, and he's a Marxist, and he just said, I don't want to join the army either, but we all believe our system, Marxism, will prove itself over time to be superior to capitalism. He truly believed it. Very interesting. And another time I was out in the woods outside of Leningrad, hiking and jogging in some sand dunes by the sea there. And lo and behold, I came upon a war zone where there were pillboxes on top of some hills pointed towards Leningrad. That was the boundary where the German army and Finnish army fought against Russia. And there was barbed wire down in the sand dunes spread all over. So this was the demarcation line, as the siege of Leningrad, most likely. They were still there. And lastly, I became interested in visiting Lenin's tomb, and we all went there. Of course, we were sent to the front of this long line in this dark building. I stood in front of Lenin, his actual body, encased in a plastic kind of bubble. And lo and behold, as Americans do, I slouched to my right, put my hand in my pocket, and all of a sudden I heard a loud command. And my right arm was jerked up in the air and pulled straight down my side to be at attention by a guard there. And it really impressed me that they would take their heritage so seriously, unlike Americans who are much more casual. Made an impression on me as to what the culture was really like and their commitment to it. So, moving along, question is why did I write the book? And as I stated, I wrote it to present the Russian and Chinese foreign policy, um, why their foreign policy is what it is, and explain their behavior. And it's a book that is written almost 4 years ago. This does not include the war. This is before the war, and it is not about Donald Trump, Putin, or Russiagate, or any of those controversies. It's historical trends unfolding that set the stage for this conflict. It's a critique of U.S. foreign policy, Vietnam, Iran, Iraq, and Serbia as well, and some of the destruction we've managed to create in those places. And I write it in a folksy way, person-to-person dialogue. It's casual. I actually call it a learning dialogue workbook because it's not like it looked like a regular book. It's 8.5 by 11 paper bound. And it has a lot of questions in it and lots of pictures and maps. And I have questions where I ask my reader, now, what do you think of Russia? Do you consider it an enemy? Why or why not? I'm playing the professor, which I am. So, I wrote it. It's written for the average person by me, and I'm an average person who has a good education and interest in this topic, but I'm not an elite. I'm not a former or current outstanding political person, CIA analyst, or a famous academic. You see all those pundits on TV, and they talk to each other. And here now I'm talking to you as one of us. Okay, I thought this would be good for Russia to have someone like me and other people like me talking, not trying to sell their country to the world, but just factually stating what appears to have really happened. But they haven't. I've sent my book to them, but I haven't really heard much from them, or anybody who is strongly associated with Russia. The book is dispelling the media narratives, the biased narratives that are coming straight from the government, basically, one way or another. Okay, you're only getting the official American point of view. Anybody else is not really allowed to say much. Okay, so it's easy to use. It has a huge table of contents. I put an entry for every idea that I bring up in there or event. So it has about 100 entries. They're not all really like typical chapters. If you want to hear about something happened, you can see the exact page I started talking about it. It makes it easy to use. And remember, the book also talks a lot about China, which is in the same situation as Russia regarding the West, same issues, Taiwan, and a lot about the U.S. economy, income inequality, and the surge of the 1950s and 60s that built the USA, the economic surge, and which is better than a military surge. So the reason I put in a section about athletics, as I said, was to impress really officials, and particularly Russians, that here is a typical American kid at that time, a star athlete, who could grow up to understand at least the Russian dilemma, if you will, and write about it, be committed enough. So we need to understand all points of view. It'll help with peace, stop biases, and then you make up your own decision, okay? I'm not making up anybody's decision for them. That's what they believe in. But you have to have all the facts. So, what am I doing for peace? Well, I'm dispelling myths and getting a message across of the big picture. And I do it through my book. And also sending copies of it electronically to people, drafts. I have a YouTube video station. You can find it under Ralph Schultz, Foreign Policy Conflict. I read my book to you in various videos and make comments on current events since started in November of 2021. I'm going to do, I've done 22 videos. I'm going to be doing one more. I do a lot of tweets. My Twitter is at Starstream007, 007. And what I try to make intelligent comments, and I try to rebut some of the well-known people. I'll respond to them in a factual, respectful way, for the most part. I've sent emails to certain key people, and my book, certain key people, like some of the CIA former presidents, secretaries, like John Brennan, Tulsi Gabbard, our friend Tucker Carlson, who is the only honest newscaster regarding Russia. He tells it like it is. I don't follow him generally, but I do think he is right on the money with his assessment of the problem with Russia and our foreign policy. Douglas McGovern, Colonel for the U.S. Army, who rebuts a lot of Ukrainian and American narratives, and Michael McFaul, former ambassador to Russia during the Obama administration, and a famous professor at Stanford. He looks at things the opposite that I do. And I've actually gotten to kind of know him a little bit. I have his personal email, and we've had some conversations. An example of a dispelling a myth is Stepan Bandera, and I will continue this in a little while. Thank you very much. It's time for all of us to take a break. Do we not agree on that? Shake your head yes. Okay, hello everybody again. Now we're talking about Stepan Bandera, who is the hero of the current Ukrainian government. Mistaken hero. So who is he? What happened? Stepan Bandera was a person who aligned themselves with the Nazis and the Wehrmacht, the German army, when it steamrolled through Ukraine, and he had his militia troops from the Lvov, Western Ukraine area, that joined up and fought the Soviet army, the Russian army, and against the Ukrainians from this other part of the state. And he didn't look Russian, and he was part of that far western Ukraine that is really Central Europe. As his Lvov, the city there, and it's the way it looks. So he was helped be responsible, it's said, for Babi Yar, the massacre of 25,000 Jews during 1942, 25 to 50, 60,000 Poles in Western Ukraine, because Poland occupied Western Ukraine. It was really part of Poland on and off for years. In the 1600s, they controlled the western half of it, and Russia the eastern half. So he is the originator, the first Germanic element to start Nazism in the Ukraine. And it all descends from him, and there's a whole, you can trace the strain, the thread of this, rather than Nazism, I call it extremist nationalism. And it evolved later into the Svoboda, which is Freedom Party, which is basically the extremist or Nazi party. And he for somehow has become a hero, and statues have been erected to him all over Ukraine. It seems disgraceful to me. It's hard to understand, but most Americans don't have the faintest idea what this is about. And if they did, they'd be shocked. And somehow the U.S. government just didn't say anything about it. They let it happen and affiliated themselves with the government that had changed and morphed into adopting a lot of these extremist characteristics, we'll say. Not entirely, but this idea exists. And that's where all these Nazi stormtroopers come from that are in the Ukrainian army. Okay, so I call it, it's extreme nationalism, extremist nationalism, and it has its origins with Stepan Bandera, who our government protected, took them out of the Soviet Union, Ukraine, and gave them a place to live in Germany after World War II. I just want to mention a few examples. There's 5 here of events and examples of Western and United States interference in Ukraine and how it's affected Russia. I have to get this here and read this. There's a woman, Laura Cooper. I saw with my own eyes, a live podcast in October of 2021. Laura Cooper was the guest, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, professional woman, middle-aged, and she was on the CISIS, Center for Strategic International Studies, podcast on a Saturday afternoon coming from Washington, D.C. No secrets. I'm sure you can find it again. And she was touting, and she was very proud of the fact that the USA was planning to build a big naval base in Romania on the Black Sea, which is very close to Crimea. It's a couple hundred miles away across the Black Sea, not far from Odessa. Now this is part of what they called a security to stop aggression in the Black Sea. Of course, stop Russia. You tell me that's not antagonistic? The USA is going to put their war fleet in there? Are you kidding me? And she also mentioned something that would help train the Georgian army, and that really raised my eyebrows. So it is, disconcerting to someone like me. And she was just very matter of fact and just happy as could be that the USA was doing such a wonderful thing. Okay, and they had given Ukraine 16 patrol boats. These are lightly armed patrol boats, to take care of their coastline. It was considered. She's very proud of the fact that the U.S. was going to have a permanent presence in the Black Sea. Okay. Now, also, in my notes, the so-called coup in 2014, when there was a major governmental forced changeover, where the national extremist ideology took over the government. The day before, there was an agreement signed. Russia and the U.S. were observers. France and Great Britain and Ukraine signed an agreement that there would be free elections in November. This was in February, this occurred. And the police, National Guard that protected the government would stand down, so to speak. They would do what they could to have less confrontations. And there were some other aspects to this. And it was going to be signed, and it never did get signed because the Rada met the next day, their Congress, and they changed everything. They voted 177-0 to introduce a new government, nullify the current one and this agreement. But there's still like 70 or 80 members missing who are afraid to show up, and those are the pro-Russia members. are the ones that didn't totally agree with this. So it was phony, and the president had to leave town in the middle of the night in a limousine, um, and be driven to the Russian border, a couple hundred miles away to for safety. It was a typical coup, and then the nationalistic ideas came to light, and the USA was behind it. There's a picture there of um, uh, Gloria Nuland choosing the new prime minister, Yatsenyuk, and the other two gentlemen are standing there at a conference table, and she's on the phone with a U.S. Ukrainian ambassador. And you've all heard that telephone call, perhaps. But I've got a video, not a video, a snapshot of it. Somebody took in that conference room. The U.S. took advantage of the situation, the Maidan, to get in a government that would be hostile to Russia and could aggressively be incorporated into NATO. There's no doubt about it. There's more proof than that. But you try to talk about it with Michael McFaul or anybody on that side of things, they just ignore you. They've canceled this as a fact. So I talk about that in the book. There's a retired U.S. Army general, he's a colonel, I know of, somebody I know, who also spent 20 years in the Department of Defense. That's like a 45-year career. In 2017, was attached for 1 year to the Ukrainian Department of Defense to help them write up their NATO application to understand how to qualify for it. And I told that to a Russian UN official, and he said it's an open secret. Thank you very much. But the U.S. was promoting UN membership for Ukraine aggressively behind the scenes. And in May of 2014, John Brennan, the CIA director, flew to Kiev. This is after Poroshenko was elected president. And in June, Poroshenko, when I saw this on the internet, said regarding Donbass, the rebellious area, was going to be in for a nasty surprise. And a few weeks later, the Ukrainian army, as it was then, attacked Donbass and shelled and bombarded them and killed a lot of people. And they were pushing the rebel militia back towards Russia, and then Russia did intervene. They had agents there, of course, but they intervened with their army and pushed back the Ukrainian army, a matter of 50 kilometers or less, and they stopped. They didn't invade Ukraine, they just protected this region, which was highly Russian. And that's where the battle lines were drawn in the trenches, and for years, shelling occurred from into Donetsk into the Russian managed area from the Ukrainian army. And that's why 10,000 civilians were killed, or most of them killed, shells coming in by Ukraine. Okay. And I saw a video picture of a woman who had just been had her legs blown off, or one leg blown off, lying down the ground, reaching out to get a cell phone from someone to call her daughter for the last time. And that wasn't a fake picture. That was someone from Luhansk, I think, who had been hit by incoming Ukrainian army shelling. This is all fake by the U.S. news media. They don't tell the true story. And, Russia has faults too, I understand. But I'm concerned about deception occurring on the U.S. presentation of things. And then we make bad decisions. Okay? Then you recall there was the major Russian security proposal from December of 2021. And in all of January, it was discussed. The U.S. didn't budge an inch to try to at least accommodate some of it, to start a dialogue. It was just forget it. It had nothing to do with it, and Russia was left in a position where they had to do something, and it turned out to be what was going to be a very limited military incursion, which got out of hand, and having all those American anti-tank weapons in there really helped the Ukrainian army. And I think everybody would have been better off if Russia had installed their own people into that government at that time, and there'd be very little fighting, and Ukraine would be a happy place, Russian and Western, trying to get itself together and develop an imperfect democracy and then create a stronger economy, but it had a lot of faults in it. A lot of economic concentration with oligarchs who basically controlled swaths of the economy and government and territory as well. It's provocation. Biden, stubborn. He's an idealist. He's right. And you have to compromise, bend, so you don't break. And everything's breaking now. So I'm going to get into some outcomes, but I want to say there's three key things you need to know about Russia. They have no history of democracy. They've always had a strong state, and the people have looked up at the strong state for protection. There's been many invasions of Russia since 1600. It's probably been 12 to 14. And then there were the Mongols, took it over from 1250 to 1450. So they have a strong state is normal, and not have a democratic government. Okay, there's no reason to expect it's going to turn to liberal democracy because some people in the U.S. think it's a good idea, and maybe 1 million Russians out of 140. So remember, there were 27 or 8 million Russians killed. They were Russians or Soviets, but 20 million were civilians, and 8 million were soldiers in World War II. The country was flat. And as I should show you on this, I'll get this for you in a second. A list of all the invasions: Sweden, Lithuania, France, Germany. They all invaded Russia, and they all got up to Moscow, or to the gates of Moscow. It's quite an incredible story. And I think it's something people need to understand. And they don't. Here is a list. Can we see it? I don't know. Probably not, huh? That's going to be backwards. Sweden in the 1600s and 1700s, in a small empire, came up to Moscow. Poland and Lithuania did. Turkey in England and France defeated Russia in the Crimean War. They were fighting over Sevastopol then. Napoleon invaded it, and army got destroyed as it retreated back to Paris. The Russians actually followed it and entered Paris temporarily, and around 1815 or so. Russia was encircled during the Cold War, had to deal with that. And now NATO came marching forward in the late 90s and looking suspiciously similar. If you look at the Russian eyes, you'd be concerned, and everybody was concerned. It wasn't Putin. This concern was going back to Gorbachev in 1991. So that is something to be concerned about. I need pictures. Picture of Victoria Nuland. I'm going to try to get a better picture for my final presentation, everybody. And that's her with the 3 Exonics there, and the other 2 choices for Prime Minister of Ukraine. This is end of February 2014. And one last picture of the right sector. This looks like a squad. Soldiers, they're all dressed up in what I call their costumes because they weren't German soldiers. Okay, can you see that? closer. This is around 2014, 2015. Okay. And one last picture, if I can make, you can see it. Here it is. And here she comes. This is a picture of the Odessa massacre. Okay. Okay. Take a break for a few minutes. Be right back. Now, the other thing we need to remember is that Russia has been an empire, and it needs to be respected and admired as an empire and treated as such. And I was there, and I could feel the depth of Mother Russia on Red Square, and people are aware of their history. So even though you disagree with them, and I'm thinking before this war, you have to treat them with respect and not as an enemy, not as a second-class citizen, like our leadership just calls Russia. This is before 2014 even, our enemy. And that is really a bad way to handle diplomacy, okay? So, and also I want to add that there's the concept of the international rule of law, which is good, but sometimes it has to be tempered by historical realism. And that's the case with Ukraine. It's a very close connection to the country of Russia. At times it's been one and the same. And Russia needs to have states alongside it that are not terribly hostile to it or perceived as hostile. And that's what happened here. The U.S. helped build a hostile state that forbid the Russian language, taught little children not to like Russia, canceled all their culture, all their incoming movies and radio stations. And, you know, that's one of the problems. So as terms of peace goes, I did write a peace proposal back in March. It took me 10 minutes to do. I just wrote it out on Twitter and I sent it to a few so-called important people. Just as a trial balloon. Okay. Sent it to some Russians. But I have I got several back and forth emails to Michael McFaul, former ambassador of Russia, who is on MSNBC. You see him all the time. A proponent of defeating Russia and bringing liberal democracy to Russia. And he's anti-Putin. Part of it's because Putin booted him out because he was entertaining dissidents and anti-Putin liberals in his home compound at the embassy on weekends and evenings. And he thought it was okay because it was his private time, just like with a corporate job. You're on company time or you do what you want in your own time. Well, I don't think an ambassador in any country has any private time. Everything is public. So I thought it was rather naive and inappropriate. Just shaking my head thinking about it. So what I said is very briefly here, I got to read this to you. It's going to be quick. What I said is I can't solve it, but here are some salient points about possible peace issues. One, and the funny thing is McFaul said this is what Putin wants. And he said it's worse than Putin's, and I didn't realize it. I just think this makes sense. I don't care where it's coming from because you got to have peace to accomplish anything. So the West recognizes the slice of Ukraine is part of Russia. It has to. It's taken it. And Crimea is better off with Russia because it was undeveloped by Ukraine. And the huge naval base there has to be controlled by Russia or they will fight for it. And that's what's going to happen coming up. The world's safer because the loss of Crimea will cause Russia to use nukes if necessary to keep it. There would be immediate ceasefire and armistice, and if possible, and a permanent new peace talks similar to the Paris peace talks in the Vietnam War that went on for 2 years. Just on and on, different officials discussing ways to solve the crisis, and the war may be continuing on and off, hot and cold. If Russia complies with the ceasefire, some of the sanctions will be lifted as an incentive. U.S. pauses at least the delivery of new advanced weapon systems, and there's no future NATO presence in Ukraine when this is over, or the Black Sea. And there were internationally observed free elections in Kiev that choose a new government. It could be the same government, but it's re-elected. There's new elections. And all the anti-Russian laws are removed. Why should they be there? And the result is Ukraine gets peace. They're destroyed now. They've already lost. The country and the people have been wrecked. China is not involved in this. And Russia gets a buffer-free zone, free of NATO influence and extremist vitriol. Okay? And this is just the starting point. Escalating a dangerous conflict is cooled down. And there's business and cultural exchange programs set up. So this was called an imperialist by the ambassador and immoral. I have those emails saved. I can't reveal them, but I can talk about them. And I'm not making it up. It startled me because he is a disciple. This is a religion to a lot of these people, this idea of spreading liberal democracy around the world. That's the neocon attitude, stuffing the American way down people's throats. That's what it amounts to. Okay, sorry to tell you that. And so there's three ways this can end. And John Mearsheimer said this on a podcast a few weeks ago, and I've been thinking the same way. I admire him very much. In fact, what I wrote in my book really coincides a lot with what he said, but I didn't know about him until a year and a half ago. It's just, so one is none of these outcomes are good because there's no off-ramp for Russia that's positive, or U.S. perhaps. One, the Russian army collapses. There's the spearhead. It goes into next to and into Crimea. Missiles are launched that start destroying Crimea and that naval base. The Russian fleet. Russia starts to fall. Army starts to fall apart. There's chaos in Moscow, and Putin and the Russian elite panic. And as they say in their official foreign policy and Department of Defense manuals, they will use tactical nuclear weapons if their national security is threatened. And it is. You have to look it through their eyes. And they'll use tactical nuclear weapons, period. They just will. Mearsheimer says so, and so do I. And what's even worse is I just heard a Russian political scientist, a renowned guy who has left Russia, lives in the West, interviewed. And what he thought, he knows these people, Putin and these people well. He said July 1st, it's been agreed, Russia has announced they're putting tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus and near the Polish border. And he said Russia could very well fire tactical nukes into Poland and Lithuania, both ways, to startle the West into freezing the conflict, to stop the invasion if Russia looks like they're getting beat. The other way is Russia beats up the Ukrainian army and starts taking over all of eastern Ukraine towards Kiev, and the West panics. And Joe Biden will not tolerate a loss. He's a typical American. He got to win, and he's an idealist. Idealists can be troublesome because they won't compromise. And they launch missiles. The U.S. and NATO launch a fusillade of missiles into Russian positions throughout Ukraine, including Crimea, and maybe across the border, and start really tearing up the Russian army. Again, Russia panics and responds, and we have a war with Russia, and probably Russia launches some nuclear weapons if they really feel like they're getting pushed back and beaten up. Not a good ending. And the last is a frozen conflict, which is probably the best while you negotiate for peace somewhere around the current borders. And but with that, you can have intermittent flare-ups of little battles here and there. Ukraine will not be allowed to develop. No one's going to invest money in a country that is a frozen conflict where it might be destroyed any day or come under Russian control. And so Ukraine would be sort of less paralyzed, and the U.S. would have to maintain some security guarantees. So Russia would stay out. It's just that would be a mess as well. So you come up with your own solution. We'll see what happens. But I don't think either side is interested in giving up much in this conflict. So it's been a good talk. I really appreciate it. I finally get to voice my opinion to lots of people. And I'm more than interested in talking to other groups who want to contact me via my email, starstream7@hotmail.com or starstream00007@gmail.com. And with that, I will get back to you. And I wish you all well, and hopefully we'll have peace soon. Thank you very much.